Part 1. The Question. Do you need to read Homestuck to read Deltarune? This question has been going around since the old days of Undertale due to the inextricable link between the two properties. Legend says that Toby Fox created Undertale in Andrew Hussey's basement, after all. Actually, before I get into the question of Deltarune, is that true? Did Toby Fox code Undertale in Andrew Hussey's basement? Oh, cool. I don't know if Toby is being literal in this tweet, but the two of them used to be close 10 years ago, so it makes sense. Okay, back to the question. It has been claimed that Homestuck is required reading for Undertale. I find this notion interesting because there are a number of ways you could ask it. 1. Does Homestuck contain necessary context to understand Deltarune? 2. Does Homestuck enhance the Deltarune experience? 3. Does Homestuck have references that someone playing Deltarune would be amused by? And 4. What other references and inspirations are part of Deltarune? First of all, I'm going to give my short answer to these topics, then try to justify them as I go. The answers might surprise you, coming from me, someone who has discussed Homestuck for so long. 1. Does Homestuck contain context necessary to understand Deltarune? The short answer is no. When I started this video, I honestly wanted the answer to be yes. After all, I've read Homestuck, and I think it's worth reading, but I don't think Homestuck has any themes that are truly required to comprehend Deltarune. The biggest thing people discuss when the link is brought up is the concept of a scratch. In other words, in Homestuck, when a universe is reset and the character's history is erased and started again. This sounds like what happened between Undertale and Deltarune, but Deltarune doesn't seem interested in the link between the two games right now. This might change later, since as of writing, Deltarune is only 4 chapters deep. Toby Fox has also said things that distance the two games. A great deal of theories have been posited about the link between the games, such as Sans being from Hometown and not the Underground, or W.D. Gaster pulling the strings of both worlds, but these seem comfortably debunked by this FAQ, which has not changed since Deltarune's original release. It's unlikely that Deltarune's events being a riff on Undertale are a scratch, though the concepts are the same. And while the connection is interesting, I doubt that players who haven't read Homestuck do not understand the connection between Undertale and Deltarune. Outside of this connection, the worlds of Homestuck and Undertale Deltarune seem to be completely separate. If the question is Homestuck's necessity to Deltarune, the answer is no. 2. Does Homestuck enhance the Deltarune experience? Again, I wanted the answer to this to be yes, but I honestly don't think there is enough overlap between these worlds for that to be true. Even the games and webcomics themes are almost completely different. Homestuck is broadly a Gnostic coming-of-age tale about kids becoming gods, and Deltarune is a story about heroes and villains in a more traditional RPG style. There are Gnostic themes in both games, such as the idea of the angel's heaven becoming something evil and bad, but this is as broad strokes as it gets. Analytical methods in Homestuck, like class-specting, don't map easily onto Deltarune either. If anything, Deltarune is more like a game from the Persona series. More on this later. The largest overlap between the two stories seems to be with the idea of prophecy and predestination, but they are tackled in such a different way that it's difficult to connect. In Deltarune Chapter 4, Chris and the gang are exploring a dark world of a church, and they see a prophecy that becomes clear would be bad if it came to pass. Susie and Gerson both decide to fight against the prophecy, even though Ralsei believes it is inevitable. In the game, too, we experience certain choices that the player can go down to get a darker path, seeming to indicate that there is more than one path possible. Whether the prophecy will occur remains to be seen. In Homestuck, by contrast, the idea of predestination is exemplified by Lord English, who is an inevitable being whose coming is already inevitable or prophetic. Homestuck's prophetic nature is entirely different, though, in that Lord English is completely inevitable, and the characters cannot fight against their fate at all. The only character who is able to fight his fate is John, but even his actions in retconning the timeline are inevitable to Lord English's plans. In this way, Homestuck and Deltarune are complete opposites in how they treat predestination. Homestuck is a fatalistic story, and Deltarune is a story centering free will, or at least that's what it seems to mean as of right now. In summary, these are two different stories with different themes and worlds by two different authors who happen to be buddies. Though they do have some real-world overlap, within the stories, they are different. 3. Does Homestuck have references that someone playing Deltarune might be amused by? I'm making this part of the video a whole section because I have a lot to say about it. Though Homestuck and Deltarune are different stories, there are heaps of references in both properties to each other, some that I want to go over in depth. This list is not exhaustive, but it is going to be long, so use the timestamps in the description to scrub around if you want. 1. References to Undertale in Homestuck. Since Undertale was released before Homestuck ended, some of its DNA got into Homestuck instead of the other way around. There are only a few, and I looked into HS2's production to find some various things. Number 1. The Lord English Undertale fight. During the fight between Devepeda and Lord English forces Devepeda into an Undertale battle screen complete with fight, act, item, and mercy commands. 2. Hiveswap Act 1 music. A version of Spook Tune, one of Napstablook's songs, was used in Hiveswap on the album Hiveswap Act 1 OST. A song titled Bedroom for an Annoying Dog is featured, referencing Toby Fox's author Sona, the Annoying Dog. The leitmotif for Snowden Town is used in two Hiveswap songs, Half Harley Manor at 1 minute and A More Defensible Position at 28 seconds, in a minor key. 3. Annoying Dog Kind. In HS2, a selectable Strife specialist is named Annoying Dog Kind. This is self-explanatory. 4. Other music. Toby is also featured in the credits of the Hiveswap Friendsim OST, the Hiveswap Act 2 OST, and the PesterQuest OST. Toby is a prolific musician, so getting into every Homestuck track he had a hand in would be pointless. He and Santiago Rodriguez are the backbone of a lot of this stuff, along with other titans like Michael Guy Bowman and Tensei. Special thanks to the Homestuck Music Wiki for help with this section. 2. References to Homestuck in Undertale. Special thanks to the MS Paint Adventures Wiki for this section. And hey, if anyone's listening from the MSPA Wiki, you gotta move that thing off fandom. It was a fucking nightmare to navigate around. 1. Name references. Pyrope, an enemy who is a burning rope in Undertale, shares a name with Terezi Pyrope and Latula Pyrope. Asriel, the final boss, is given the same epigraph as Lord English, the god of hyper-death. 2. Music references. There are quite a few tracks that Toby worked on for Homestuck that were repurposed for Undertale, including Sands, which was originally titled Muscle. Beyond this, there are leitmotifs that refer back to Homestuck, such as Another Medium being a reference to a remix of Doctor from Homestuck. Your Best Nightmare shares a motif with Terezi's theme, possibly because the Justice Soul and Terezi both have themes of justice. Flowey's laugh is also famously Caliborn's laugh on the album Cherubim, Toby composing the track The Lordling. And need I mention Megalovania, which is something like Toby Fox's signature, appearing in the Earthbound hack, Homestuck, and Undertale. 3. The Alphys John connection. This one's pretty funny. Apparently Alphys's design was inspired partially by John Egbert.
Alpi square glasses are inspired by John Egbert. No one needed to know that.
But now they do.
Who's John Egbert?
Reed, it's a
Shout-outs to
Homestuck
the
thing.
best comic.
You wouldn't understand.
Oh, I'm just a dad.
Yeah.
This is very superficial, but I still get a kick out of it. 3. References to Homestuck in Deltarune. 1. Lancer's Spade Bucket. This is just a visual gag, an in-joke for Homestuck fans, but this is clearly a filial pail. 2. The Queen Kanaya connection. Queen shares a typing quirk with Kanaya, capitalizing every word. There are other characters who have typing quirks in Deltarune, such as Caddy having a similar speech pattern to Roxy Lalonde and the unique speaking style of Jockington. 3. Jamiroquai looking ass. In Chapter 2, there appears a silhouette of a troll in the cyber field. This appears to be a reference and in-joke. Trolls are on the internet in Homestuck, but this could also reference internet trolls conceptually. 4. Vrisk Couch. This is possibly a stretch, but these look like Vriska's horns. 5. Rules Auspitus. Again, this could be a stretch, but Rules says he has a card-based relationship system in Chapter 3, similar to Troll Quadrants. I call this a stretch because his relationship with El Niño and La Niño is a more basic throuple and not true auspisticis. Auspicious. Worcestershire sauce. 4. Other things. There are a number of other references and connections, but I made this list with all the things that I thought could possibly be concrete and intentional. Obviously, I was surprised with how little there really was, even when referencing other lists and more tenuous connections. It really feels like these references are mostly in-jokes than something intended to fully point to another piece of media. Part 2. Other Influences. Researching this video was tough. I come from a background of Homestuck, so my immediate assumption was that there would be something present in Deltarune or Undertale that would act as a significant influence, but there just isn't. Homestuck's influence over Deltarune is mainly contained to musical motifs and gags. In retrospect, this seems very normal. Toby Fox and Andrew Hussey, though they worked on the same project, have very different influences and visions when it comes to storytelling. And Toby doesn't seem to have any influence over Homestuck, so why would the reverse be true? These are two different works by different people who happened to be associates. The truth is slightly disappointing, but, that's how the truth is sometimes, I guess. And it's not like there's nothing, so there is something to go on. Now, this could change later down the line, so let's not throw out Homestuck entirely here. But seeing the almost total lack of Homestuckness in Deltarune made me wonder, what did influence this game? And I'm going to go down in a numbered list. 1. Mother. Let's get this one out of the way. The Mother series and its influence on indie games has been discussed so much on YouTube that it makes me absolutely sick. I'm replaying Mother 3 right now, and yes, it is that good. Mother, the trilogy of games, written by Shigesato Itoi, is a series that was not appreciated in its time, but is most certainly appreciated now, with countless people singing its praises over the years, and Mother 3 being one of the most downloaded ROMs in history. Mother's influence over Undertale is very clear, from its sometimes odd layouts to its simple sprites to its pixel style. It also shares an offbeat and dense world with small, humorous interactions offsetting a sometimes upsetting story. Thematically, they are also similar, with young characters forced to undergo great change in order to save the world. And I'm going to leave it at that. There are other videos on this topic, as well as the channel Monkey Ness, who I'm going to give a shout out to here, that do it a great deal of justice. And I have more interesting things to talk about in terms of the references. 2. Persona and SMT. I mentioned Persona before, and for anyone who's played those games, the comparisons should be very obvious. In all 6 mainline Persona games, the story centers around a group of young adults who gain magic powers that assist them in doing battle in clandestine realms. This, if you haven't noticed yet, is the plot of Deltarune as it stands. Over the years, I've seen people imply that Toby ripped off Persona in some way, but I would call that notion stupid. Kids running around different realms that are metaphors for their social struggles are as old as The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. It's a storytelling archetype that Toby Fox seems to be very in his element depicting. Persona, and more broadly Shin Megami Tensei, also features a battle system that allows communication with enemy characters, much like Undertale and Deltarune's Act system. Persona 3, much like Undertale, features a protagonist who is very stoic and quiet, marching towards an event he knows will mean his own death. That kind of fatalism is interesting, particularly when the player is contributing to that mission. Persona 4 also depicts a silent yet emotive protagonist, and like Frisk and Chris, he also has a flirtatious streak, and in spite of his quiet nature, people are magnetically attracted to him. Persona 4's TV worlds also reflect Deltarune's dark worlds in how real things are distorted into otherworldly realms that resemble video games. Persona 5 released after Undertale, but there are too many overlaps between the dark worlds and cognitive worlds there too. The final antagonist of Persona 5 also takes the form of a vague angel. It's hard to say more before Deltarune is complete, to say everything though. 3. Cave Story. Cave Story's influence on Undertale is very on the nose. Both games take place in a cave. Both games feature unique characters who are ambiguous goat monsters. Both games feature a silent protagonist who is revealed to have more character than it first seems. It's been said before, but the Mimiga race resembles the Asriel family, particularly young Asriel himself. Neither Undertale nor Deltarune have a world map, much like the original cave story, leading to a rather small world feeling far larger than it really is, consisting of a handful of main areas and adventure stages. Balrog and Misery, though they are traditional enemies, could be compared to Undertale's boss monsters, in that they are recurring characters who aren't necessarily evil. Cave Story blurs the line between enemy and friend quite a bit, a theme that is later advanced in Undertale. 4. The Touhou Project.
経験したことですから。僕の心もインディーゲームをプレイして輝いたことがあります。洞窟物語とか、夢日記とか、そしてもちろん、ズンさんの東宝プロジェクトと
I'm not a player of the Touhou games myself, but I have seen them played and I am a fan of their music. Toby's music seems hugely inspired by Touhou, both in style and the way he utilizes motifs that carry into other games. Undertale's combat system is also reminiscent of Touhou's focus on bullet hell mechanics. I would speak more on this, but Touhou is a very dense series of games. For an introduction to the series, there are some stream compilations by Greyfruit going over the series' history. I'll put the link in the description. 5. Brandish. Brandish is an old RPG dungeon crawler on the SNES originally released for the NEC PC, whatever that is. Take one look at the protagonist and you can immediately see the similarities between him and Chris. Varric, or as he is called in later remasters, Ares, echoes in many of Toby Fox's works. In the first game, Varric falls down into a hole into the underground ruins of a civilization and begins the events of the game. Sound familiar? Varric is also the name of the protagonist of Toby's infamous Earthbound Halloween hack, which people consider to be a prototype for many of Undertale's later themes. Toby has distanced himself from this hack over the years, so I'm not going to belabor that point too much. If you're interested in Brandish, either track down the PSP version or the novelization called Brandish Storybook. It's worth a peek. 6. Moon Remix RPG. Moon is an interesting RPG that I won't get into too much because I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't played it. It's a quirky little game. I see it as kind of a midpoint between Earthbound and Undertale, and it's definitely still worth playing in the modern day. If you're interested, it's on Nintendo Switch and was originally released for PS1. Undertale asks the question, what if there were an RPG where no one had to die? And Moon asks a very similar question. What about everyone else in the world of an RPG? 7. Chrono Trigger. Much like Earthbound, Chrono Trigger's titanic influence over Toby Fox and gaming as a whole has been repeated ad infinitum, so I won't say much on the matter. More than any other game on this list, however, I think that Chrono Trigger deserves a look by modern audiences. It's available on Steam. The best version, in my opinion, is the DS remake. 8. Yume Nikki and Off. Yume Nikki and Off are unconventional RPGs released after the turn of the century, when the internet was beginning to become more friendly to indie game development. They were both made in the RPG Maker engine, and feature unconventional stories that push the boundaries of what an RPG can be. Yume Nikki does not have a combat at all and focuses entirely on exploration through dreamlike worlds. Undertale's layouts and surrealism harken back to Yume Nikki, and the boundaries for this have been pushed in Deltarune's Dark Worlds. Off is a more typical RPG mechanically, featuring battles and enemies, but the story of the game has an anti-player theme that Undertale and Deltarune also share. I mention these games together because they are both cut from the same cloth, and I would recommend them both. 9. Morality systems. This is a little bit more vague, so hear me out. Morality systems in games were all the rage back in the day. Mass Effect, Infamous, Dragon Age, Fallout 3, Dishonored. Someone has probably made a comprehensive list of this type of game, and it's probably very long. However, most of these moral systems were based around a very black and white notion of good and evil that doesn't translate well into a game mechanic. Fallout New Vegas tried to improve this moral system by instead creating a reputation system based on what various factions thought of you, but the karma system still existed. Generally, moral systems in these games had a vague chaotic dialogue option and a vague kind dialogue option that you could select between to get different outcomes, like partners and factions. In Fallout, the karma mechanic was very vague. You could get a low karma by being a petty thief or by being a mass murderer. The system could not account for that complexity. It was just a point system that went up or down. These systems, however, didn't really work. There is an inherent issue that comes with these systems. That is, the broad story of the games has to be playable no matter what decision you decide to undertake. This is not always bad, strictly speaking, but there was an element missing, and the unintentional outcome of most of these half-baked moral systems were options that felt shallow or comically evil in some cases. For instance, the Renegade Paragon system in Mass Effect was less of a way for a player to have their values reflected back at them, and more of a character creation system where the commitment to either direction began to self-reinforce. Undertale's morality system, if you could call it that, has the player embarking on 3 radically different paths depending on how they act, where the gameplay's goals and experience almost completely shifts. The Pacifist run looks entirely different to a Genocide run. It recontextualizes the entire game. You as a player get to make a decision. Will you save everyone or kill everyone? And if you fail to do either, the game gives you a half-hearted and disappointing ending. In this way, Undertale takes these binary systems of morality and entirely commits to them, judging the player based on them. The Genocide run feels bad to play. This isn't a system where you're a renegade or you're trying to max out your chaos meter. This is a genocide run. You're expected to actively hunt down and kill what the game depicts as people. It's much more effective than any other system of its kind. 10. Pacifist Challenges. Another trend from yesteryear were the ubiquitous YouTube videos with titles such as, "Can you complete Mario without collecting a coin? Can you finish Metroid without killing any enemies?" These challenge videos harken back to an older trend known as the Nuzlocke Challenge, a way for gamers to interact with games in unintended and new ways. Undertale and Deltarune both involve these kind of challenges into their game design, more explicitly in Undertale, but also in Deltarune. Deltarune's castle town is more populated the more Darkners you befriend, giving the player who goes out of their way to recruit characters an explicit gameplay benefit. The idea of a "can I beat Deltarune without killing anyone" video is a moot point, because that scenario is involved in the gameplay itself. In fact, these mechanics being codified have led to an interesting and alternative form of unintended play. There are countless Undertale mods that feature hard mode bosses for the player to fight, such as harder fan-made versions of Undying the Undying and Genocide Sans. This is interesting, because instead of video content, people are actively making fan games to satisfy their craving for gameplay challenge. Part 3. LOL. Though the conclusion I came to in this video surprised me, and it turned out Homestuck was less impactful on Deltarune than I assumed, there's a great deal of value in tracing the origins of a piece of art to other pieces of art. All art is derivative in some way. Derivative, a word which has an undue negative connotation. Everything is based on something, and you could probably trace art back to the original cave paintings from hundreds of millennia ago if you tried hard enough. The earliest link in this chain is Earthbound that I discussed, but Earthbound itself has roots in Final Fantasy, in Pokemon, and before that, pencil and paper RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. And before that, fantasy literature from C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien, and before that, Norse mythology, Christian mythology, and before that, earlier pagan influences, and so on and so on. All art, especially narrative art, feeds back into the collective soup of influences and mythology, and exploring that soup and trying to find its ingredients is not only fun, but informative. Beyond that, I hope I've given you some cool games to check out if you haven't already. Touhou and Chrono Trigger are great places to start. So, this is the Patreon question of the video. I'm going to start doing this on Patreon. If you have a question for the videos that I'm putting out in July, then ask me on my Patreon. For this first Q&A, I made it available to anyone who's subscribed to me on Patreon, which does not necessarily include people who have paid. So you can comment even if you haven't paid for my Patreon this time. So the question comes from Sunny Dionysus. Shout out to Sunny Dionysus. And he asks, what do you think ties Megalovania together throughout the iterations? What I'm assuming they're talking about is, what ties Megalovania together through the Earthbound hack, through Homestuck, and then through Undertale. And that's a tough question because it seems like Megalovania does not have any through lines. Like, Dr. Andonuts, Vriska, and Sans are very, very different people. I would say almost comically different. So it almost seems like Toby just put them in because he had a song that might fit. I think Megalovania fits Vriska the most. I know that's going to piss off people who love that to say that Megalovania is Aradia's song, but I don't think that's true. I mean, it does show up when she's going God tier, but it's got Vriska's instrumentation in it. It's got, Megalovania fits Vriska a lot more. So I guess the answer that I would give is I don't think there is anything that connects them. I think it was just a song that Toby kind of put in as like an Easter egg. I think the most iconic version is the one used in Homestuck because it has that intro bit. But that's just my opinion. I think they're all pretty good. There's a reason it's the most covered Toby Fox song. All right, well, I'll see you later. Like I said, go to my Patreon if you want to ask me a question. Have a good day.